One spring, two men from opposite corners of the Highlands arrived in Inverness on the same day. They were both looking for work, and by chance they were both fiddlers. They were young, they were strong, willing to put their hands or turn their backs to whatever job needed doing. There was no work. Nothing at the docks, nothing in the inn yards, the grand houses, the shops had help enough. Dispirited and hungry, the young men walked about the town. Oh, they passed each other a time or two, but it wasn't until evening, when their paths crossed for the third time, that they each noticed the fiddle in the other's pack. Unable to pay for a meal, they decided to raise their spirits by making music. Each one was an accomplished musician, but when they played together, the music was happy and harmonious, gay and glad, lively. It was the kind of music that set toes tapping and feet flying. It was music that made an angel weep or a fairy laugh. The men soon gathered a crowd of listeners. But as you know, listening to music is thirsty work. So when the listeners moved to an inn, they drew the fiddlers with them. The innkeeper, knowing a crowd pleaser when he heard it, kept the fiddlers in drink. By week's end, even though the fiddlers had no regular work, they did have an in-loft to sleep in and a bowl of pottage at night's end. And word of the two fiddlers of Inverness began to fly about the town and across the county. Soon anyone who was having a ceilidh or a gathering of any kind was looking for the two fiddlers. People said the music the fiddlers played was bright and bold, bonny and brave. It was music that could summon the wee folk. So the fiddlers came to play at wakes and weddings, at christenings, balls and parties. They played all over the county. Well, they didn't play on Tomahurrick Hill, but no one lived up Tomahurrick Way because that hill was enchanted. It was the realm of the little people. And playing here, there, and everywhere, bit by bit, the fiddlers began to come up in the world. By summer, they moved out of the hayloft and took rooms at the inn. Come autumn, they were able to order bespoke overcoats and tall top hats. And in December, oh, they were taking meat with every meal and treating their friends to glasses of whiskey. So by Christmas, they were living beyond their means, but their worth was known and their credit was good. In those times in Scotland, Christmas was a more subdued celebration. People saved the revelry, the mirth, the dances for Hogmanay, for New Year's Eve. And so, as New Year's Eve approached, the innkeeper cleaned the inn from top to bottom. He settled any debts that he had because he wanted to step into the new year with a clean conscience. And he wanted to give the fiddlers the same opportunity. So he had a wee word in their ear, mentioning that they were in arrears with the rent. The fiddlers were appalled by this oversight on their part. They explained to the innkeeper that they were planning to pay him on Hogmanay Eve when they came home from playing from a grand ball. They said they were going to rap at the window and knock on the door, pull him from his bed and pour the coins into his hands. And, as promise and pledge of their good intentions, the fiddlers told the innkeeper that they were willing to leave their coats with him. The innkeeper would have rather kept the fiddles, but he knew that without the means to make music, the fiddlers would have no means to make money. So he accepted the overcoats And he settled with the fiddlers that they would come first footing New Year's Day in the morning and give him the money then. Now, the fiddlers had a dilemma, because they had no work for Hogmanay Eve. They had had opportunities, but they'd turned their noses up and the jobs down, thinking something better would come along. So now, on the 30th of December and the 31st, they were rapping on doors, offering their services, and being turned away because people had made other plans. Hogmanay Eve found the fiddlers sheltering in the marketplace, hands thrust into their oxters, fiddles tucked inside their jackets. And that's when they were approached by an older man, a fellow with a slouched hat and a waxed coat. "Be ye the two fiddlers of Inverness?" When they nodded, the man pulled a chamois sack of coins from his pocket, and by the clink, the fiddlers knew this sack contained shillings and guineas, not just copper pence. "Well," said the man, "I've a job of work for you up Tomahurrick way, if you don't mind the walk." It was no great distance from Inverness to Tomahurrick Hill, unless you weren't wearing a coat. But the fiddlers agreed, and as they were without coats, they were soon shivering and asking, "Are we there yet?" They were glad when their guide pulled an iron key out of his pocket and slipped it into the lock of a door set well back in a stone arch. When the door opened, those fiddlers tumbled through so quickly they didn't take a moment to look at the house they were entering. Down a cobbled passage and into a great room that was warm and bright. All around them stood a fair-faced crowd, ladies in silk and satin, dresses trimmed with lace, and men, gentlemen, standing tall and proud in kilts of Highland plaid. The room smelled of beeswax candles, of roast meat and fresh-baked bannock. The men were told to refresh themselves. They did. They ate and they drank. They warmed their hands at the fire, and then they began to play. Each one was a master musician, and that night when they played, the notes wound themselves together like threads in a tapestry. It filled the room with sound and liveliness, brightness and brilliance. People danced. The ladies' skirts swirled just above the floor, and the men's feet moved so quickly they hardly seemed to lift above the hardwood. The fiddlers, they played straight through the midnight supper and long past the 2 o'clock break. They played till the sun began to rise and the dancers began to leave. It wasn't till there was no one left but their guide that the fiddlers stopped, put their instruments away. The man poured the coins into their hands, unlocked the passage door, and showed them out just as the sun was rising over the next hill. The sky all around them was filled with brilliance. Peach, pink, pomegranate red, the color dazzled their eyes, and so the men were unable to see what stables, sties, or barns surrounded the manor they'd been in. They walked back to Inverness, tired and elated, sure their troubles were over. And when they reached the town, they were surprised, appalled actually, to see what people were wearing. Strange, outlandish fashions. Why would anyone dress themselves like that on New Year's Day in the morning, particularly if they were planning to attend divine service? The men moved on, but when twice apprentice boys stopped, pointed, and doubled over with laughter, the men's feelings were hurt. After all, why was it so strange to see a man without an overcoat? They walked on, but at the corner of their street, they stopped and scratched their heads. They were both positive that a tobacconist shop was on the corner of the street. But it wasn't. Instead, there was a 3-story house with a shining new roof. The men were positive they'd filled their tobacco pouch there a time or two. But then they looked at each other and realized that their lives were made up of late nights, glasses of whiskey, games of cards, midnight suppers. They realized that was not the life they should be leading. And they vowed that in the new year they would lead a more sober existence. A moment later, a church bell rang out, and the men turned and entered the church. They found seats at the front. The prayers, that was easy. They remembered them, words they'd said since childhood. But the hymns proved difficult. The tunes tangled in the back of their throat, and the words tripped their tongues. But the men knew it had been a good while since they'd been to worship. When the sermon began, they sat back, prepared to be elevated, improved. And they were, until the minister mentioned the name of God. And at that moment, a crack rang out, the sound of a frozen branch breaking. And in front of the eyes of the entire congregation, those fiddlers disappeared. Dust and ash blew about the church. The coats were never redeemed. The innkeeper was never paid. The fiddlers, well, the ball they'd played at was a fairy ball, a ball that didn't just happen on Hogmanay Eve. It was a dance that lasted for 100 years. Two Fiddlers of Inverness, a traditional tale.
Near the deep, dark waters of Loch Ness, there once lived a young lad by the name of Kyle. All the food his family had to eat was what they grew on the narrow stretch of land that ran between their cottage and the shore of the loch. Kyle had lived there quite happily for the 11 years of his life, helping his mother and his father work their wee croft, when one evening he heard his mother say to his father, "'Tis almost time for spring sowing. You must rise early tomorrow to plow our fields and make them ready." But Kyle's father said, "I am too old now to drag the plow around the fields, and Kyle is yet too young." "What will become of us then?" asked the boy's mother. "If we do not plow our fields, we will have no crops, and when winter comes, we will surely starve." Her husband looked out the window. "I have seen a fine black horse these last nights of the silver moon standing there on the loch shore. I think I could harness it and make it pull our plow." "No," said Kyle's mother. "That is a beast you must stay away from. It is not a horse. It is one of the spirits that roam near fresh water to trap unwary folk and drown them. Do not go near it, husband. 'Tis not a horse, 'tis a water kelpie." "Nonsense." Her husband laughed. "That is a fine black horse. I can take the rope from our plow and tie it round yon horse's neck. Then I will take hold of its mane and haul myself up onto its back. I can tether the horse to our plow, and it can do the work that I am no longer able to. By this time tomorrow night, our fields will be ready for spring sowing." But Kyle's mother would have none of it. "I tell thee, that is no ordinary horse. And 'tis said that a water kelpie cannot be controlled by a plain rope. Only a bridle made of iron can do that. The mane of the kelpie is magic. If you take hold of it, your fingers will become caught. And if you sit on the horse's back, your legs will become stuck to its body. Husband, do not go near the loch tonight." But her husband, as sometimes happens with husbands, refused to listen. Taking up the plow rope, he put on his woolen plaid and went out the door. Kyle's mother rushed to the doorway. "Husband, come back, come back. The legend has been told in story and song that no man can ride the water kelpie and live. Come back, husband, come back." But her husband had made up his mind, and on he went. Kyle would have gone to help his father, for he was a brave boy, but his mother held him close. From the doorway of their cottage, Kyle and his mother watched as his father approached the horse on the shore of the loch. The horse stood quiet enough as his father approached it, and it stood perfectly still as his father put the rope round the horse's neck, and it remained quiet as he grabbed hold of the mane and hauled himself up onto the horse's back. But as soon as he was seated, a gleam of wickedness came into that horse's eyes that even Kyle and his mother could see from where they stood. "Look now," she whispered. The horse, which was indeed a water kelpie, suddenly grew in size until it was twice the height it had been before. It snorted and stamped its feet on the shingles of the shore so that sparks flew from its hooves. Then the kelpie raised its great head and bared its terrible teeth. Fire blazed from its throat and smoke plumed from its nostrils. The kelpie tossed its head, and the long hair of its mane turned into serpents. Spitting and hissing, they wound themselves around the man's hands. The water kelpie was so enraged to have this man dare to sit on his back that it reared up high into the air, not once, but 3 times. And when it crashed its hooves down onto the shingle of the shore, the kelpie turned its head away from the shore and began to race towards the deep, dark waters of the loch. "Jump off! Jump off!" shouted Kyle's mother. But her husband could not jump off, for he was stuck to the kelpie's back, and his hands were trapped by the serpents that coiled around them. Suddenly, the kelpie raced at full speed, galloped into the loch, and disappeared under the water. Kyle and his mother searched and called out his father's name the whole night long, but the only responses were the howling of the wind and the crashing of the waves upon the rocks. In the morning, the plow rope and the woolen plaid washed up on the shore. With a heavy heart, Kyle brought them home to his mother, who sat weeping by the fire. "Now we will surely starve to death," she said. "I will go to the loch," said Kyle, "and catch some fish." "There will be no fish. in the waters where a kelpie lives, said his mother. I can but try, said Kyle, and he went down to the loch and began to fish. He sat there most of the day, catching nothing. No one else was about until an old woman came by, gathering wood for her fire. A pleasant day, said Kyle, to be happy in the sun's warmth before it ends. Aye, that it is, said the old woman, but I am not warm at night, when my bones ache with the cold. Kyle's father had told him many a time that no matter how poor you were, there was always someone poorer. So when the boy saw that the old woman had only a worn shawl to keep her warm, he went into the cottage and brought out his father's woolen plaid for her. I do not take without giving in return, said the old woman, and she handed Kyle her own shawl in exchange. She stared at him as she did so and said, It can be better to sit upon a plaidie than wrap it round you. That day, Kyle caught one fish. The next day, as Kyle was fishing, the old woman came by again. Another fine day for you to enjoy, said the boy. Aye, that it is, said the old woman. But if I had bread in my belly, I would enjoy it more. Here, have mine, said Kyle, and he handed the woman the piece of bread his mother had given him for his breakfast. I do not take without giving in return, said the old woman, and she gave the boy a lump of salt in a little pouch. She stared at him as she did so and said, Salt can be used to kill rather than to cure. Kyle tied the pouch around his waist, and that day he caught 2 fish. On the 3rd day, when the old woman came by again, Kyle wondered what she might want. He had already given her his good plaid and his bread. What else did he have? Oh, another lovely day, he said as she stopped to watch him fish. Good for walking and talking. That it is, said the old woman. But better it would be for me if I had a rope to pull the bucket from my well. Without a word, Kyle went and got the plough rope to give to her, since it was of no use to him as he could not drag the plough around the fields. I do not take without giving in return, said the old woman, and she handed Kyle a bridle for a horse. She stared at him as she did so and said, Iron is not only used to make a pot. And that day, Kyle caught 3 fish. When his mother was cooking the fish for their supper, Kyle told her about the old woman. Aye, she is well known hereabouts as a spae wife, said his mother. You mark well whatever she told you, and remember her words. Well, the days went by, and when the time for spring sowing was almost gone, there came another night when the moon shone silver. Kyle looked from the window of the cottage and saw a black horse standing by the loch. The water kelpie! Kyle was determined, but his mother tried her best to dissuade him. Mother, he said, if we are to live through next winter, we must plow our fields straight away. I must capture the kelpie and make it work for me. I really have no other choice. What makes you think you can succeed when your father failed," sobbed his mother. "The story has been told in story and in legend and song that no man can ride the water kelpie of Loch Ness and live." But Kyle was determined. Even though his mother barred the door, when at last she fell asleep, he put the shawl around his shoulders and, taking up the horse bridle, Kyle did what any self-respecting boy would do and climbed out the window. He walked right down to the edge of the loch. "My, but you are a bonny beastie," he murmured as he put his hands up on the horse's neck to grab hold of its mane and haul himself up on its back. But then he paused for a moment, and he remembered the words the old woman had spoken when she gave him the first gift. "It can be better to sit upon a plaidie than wrap it round you." So Kyle took the shawl from his shoulders and spread it over the beast's back. And then he hauled himself up onto its back. For a single second, the beast stood still, and then it began to grow in size so that Kyle saw his cottage grow smaller and smaller, his mother, a tiny figure, standing in the doorway, shrieking at him to jump off at once. "I will not," shouted Kyle, "not until the kelpie plows our fields." Oh, when the kelpie heard that, it was enraged. It was enraged, and it snorted and then spoke in a terrible voice. "No man can ride the water kelpie and live. Now you are doomed as your father was doomed before you, for I will not do as you command." Fire and smoke belched from its mouth, and the kelpie reared and bucked. Kyle tried to hold the horse tighter, and he grabbed hold of that mane, and under his hands he felt the silky hair change into fat serpents. Spitting and hissing, they tried to coil around Kyle's hands. And that was the moment when he remembered what the old woman had said when she gave him the second gift. Salt can be used to kill rather than to cure. Quickly, he opened the little pouch of salt and crushed the lump between his palms. And at once, the serpents shrank and withered, and Kyle was able to hold the kelpie's head and pull the way he wanted to go. But the kelpie was still enraged, and it fought to try and toss Kyle from its back. But Kyle held fast. The kelpie snorted, stamped, tried to turn its head away from the shore and raced towards the deep, dark waters of the loch. But then Kyle remembered what the old woman had said when she gave him the third gift. Iron is not only used to make a pot. He knew that the metal parts of the bridle were made of iron. So, brave boy that he was, he reached down and slipped the bridle over the kelpie's head and put the iron bit into its mouth. At once, the kelpie became quiet and tame and obeyed Kyle's commands. He rode up to the doorway of the cottage and bade his mother run to their nearest neighbor and borrow a stout rope. This she did, and Kyle tethered the horse to the plow. And then he led that beast up hill and down until every one of their fields was plowed. But not only did Kyle plow their own fields, He ploughed the fields for miles around Loch Ness, for 'tis well known in some circles that water kelpies have the strength of 100 horses. When the ploughing was done, Kyle waited for another night when the moon shone silver. He led the water kelpie to the edge of the loch, and then he removed the bit from its mouth and took the bridle from its head. The kelpie kicked up its hooves, flicked its tail, and ran at full speed into the deep, dark waters of Loch Ness. And so, there you have the tale of the water kelpie of Loch Ness. The legend that had been told in story and song was indeed true. No man could ride the water kelpie and live, but the beast met its match in a young lad by the name of Kyle.
Some days, when the Orkney fisherman's wife walked by the sea, days when the light was just right, she'd see, or she'd think she could see, Shule Skerry, a small, desolate, rocky hump of land. No one lived there. It was just home to seals, seabirds, and selkies. And some days the fisherman's wife would think of the tales people told, and shrug and go on her way. The fisherman and his wife lived by the shore of the sea, and the sea provided for them. The house they lived in was made of stones that they'd gathered from the shore, and the roof of that house was covered in moss that they'd gathered from the shallows. The moss kept the house warm in winter, cool in summer. All the food the fisherman and his wife ate came from the sea, shrimp and clams, fish. So there was nothing they needed that didn't come from the sea. But there was something they wanted. A child. Oh, how they wanted a child. Every evening, the fisherman's wife would sit by the fire. She'd rock the empty cradle, and she'd sigh. And mornings, when the fisherman left to make his catch, she'd say to him, "You've your nets and your lines and your boats and your creel. Your hands are full and busy, but I have no child. My arms are empty." And the days passed, the weeks, the months, and even the years, and the cradle remained empty. The fisherman, he said nothing, even though he wanted a child as much as his wife did. But he feared that his grief would double her own. And one morning, when the fisherman set out for his boat, as he always did, he found a seal pup stranded in a tidal pool, crying out for its own kind. The fisherman looked out to sea. He glanced left and right. He even looked over his shoulder at the cliffs, but there were no other seals. The fisherman pulled the jersey off his back, dipped it in the cool salt water, and wrapped up the crying pup. He looked at it. "You've no mother, and you've no father, and I've no child. So we'll bide together the while, and then you'll go back in the sea." And the fisherman did no work that day. When his wife saw her husband coming home at an unaccustomed hour with no shirt on her back, she was frightened. Her heart beat fast in her chest, and she ran forward. "What is it? What is it? What is the matter?" "'Tis nothing," he said, and he thrust the damp bundle into her arms. The woman pulled back the layers of cloth. "Nothing? You call this nothing?" The the fisherman and his wife stared into the face of a bonny baby. The child had blue-gray eyes like the calm sea, and its hair was blonde-white, like foam on the crest of a wave. "'Tis a selkie," the fisherman told her, "a man on the land and a seal in the water. This one will not go back in the sea." The fisherman nodded, but he knew in his heart that wasn't right. They called the child Grayling because he was bright and lively like the fish, and Grayling grew from a baby to a child, one who'd collect seashells. He grew from a child to a boy who sometimes fetched driftwood home to burn in the hearth. And from a boy, Grayling became a lad, strong and clever, able to mend his father's nets and caulk the boat. But Grayling never swam in the sea, and he never sailed in the sea on his father's boat. He would watch the water, but that was all. One autumn, a great storm blew in from the North Sea. Waves roared across the shingle and battered on the door of the house. Rain thundered down and washed the moss off the roof, and the wind wrapped itself around the chimney and howled. The fisherman's wife clutched Grayling's hand in her own, and together they clambered up the cliff to stand with the other fishing folk and look out to sea, watching for boats. The fisherman's wife saw her husband's boat. The mast was broken and flapping like the broken wing on an injured gull, and her husband was clutching the gunwales, bobbing up and down with every wave. "Please," she cried, "please, someone help him." People on the cliff looked away. They knew the wind. They knew the water. They understood the danger. But the fisherman's wife, she wanted her husband. "Please, please try. Someone bring back my own dear heart." People stared at their shoes, or they glanced back at the windows of the houses behind them. No one moved. The fisherman's wife begged, "Please, just try." An old man, a fellow who was leaning on a blackthorn stick, looked her straight in the eye. "Send your son. He looks a likely lad." "No," shrieked the fisherman's wife, and she wrapped her arms around Grayling. "He'll not go into the sea." But Grayling pulled away from his mother. "I can do it," he said. "I could bring father back." He ran towards the cliff, arched his back, and dove into the wild waves. As Grayling went under the water, bubbles came up like fingers, and those bubbles slipped the shoes from his feet. They tugged the trousers from his leg and slid the shirt from his shoulders, so that Grayling was bare, naked, his skin as smooth and sleek as a seal's pelt. The fisherman's wife watched and waited. She did not see her son's head. She did see a seal swim near the fisherman's boat, and she saw the seal nudge the fisherman towards the far shore. Later that day, when the storm had abated, men walked along the sand. A shoe was found, part of a shirt, and these things were put in the fisherman's hands. Men told him, "Your son was brave. He was a strong lad. But he's gone to the sea now." The fisherman nodded. And that night, when he told his wife, she cried. They both cried. They cried through the night. But the dawn did come, and a day passed, slowly. Each day felt like a week, and a week could have been a month. Those months were as long as a year, but eventually a year did roll round. And a year to the day of that North Sea storm, the fisherman and his wife went to sit by the shore. This was no unusual thing. Fishermen often sat by the shore. And while they sat watching the water, a gray seal swam close. This too was no unusual thing. Seals often came to rest in the calm water. But this seal was no ordinary seal. This seal was their son Grayling, come back from Shule Skerry to tell them of his travels, of the treasures he'd found, of the lands he'd seen. Grayling, a Selkie story by Jane Yolen.
There was once a girl called Kirsty MacLeod. She was just an ordinary girl who lived in an ordinary house with her ordinary parents. Kirsty had beautiful long red hair, and every morning Kirsty's father would brush her hair until it shone, and her mother would braid it into one long plait that hung down Kirsty's back. One day, Kirsty was out for a walk when she was about to cross the river over a bridge, and she saw a wily fox standing there. The wily fox saw Kirsty MacLeod and thought to himself, "Oh, that little girl looks good enough to eat. Why, I could drag her home to my den and gobble her up for my supper." The fox stopped Kirsty MacLeod and said, "Hello, little girl." "Hello," said Kirsty. She was a polite child who had been taught very good manners. "And where are you off to today?" asked the wily fox. "Oh, that is of no interest to you," said Kirsty, for although she was polite and well-mannered, she knew that her business was her own and no one else's. "You could come and visit me in my den," said the fox. "No, thank you," said Kirsty. "I have darling cubs you could play with," said the fox. "No," said Kirsty. Well, that wily fox was angry when he saw that this little girl would not do as he asked. So he thought he would trap her with a cunning trick. He said, "I am so sad, for I may never see my cubs again. For I am afraid of running water, and I cannot cross over a river even on a bridge by myself. But if you would only let me hold on to the end of your long plait of red hair, I know that I could get across." Kirsty realized that she was going to have to think carefully to figure out the best way to deal with this wily fox. "Very well," she said, "but first you must shut your eyes tight so you will not see the running water. Then I will give you the end of my plait to hold." The fox closed his eyes and thought that once he had hold of Kirsty's plait of hair, he would never let go. He would drag her home to his den. There would be no way for her to escape. When Kirsty saw that the fox's eyes were closed, she took the end of the fox's own long red tail and gave it to him to hold. Of course, the fox cheated a bit and opened his eyes a little. But when he saw the red hair, he thought that he did indeed have Kirsty's plait between his teeth. "Hold on tight," she said. "Oh, I will," said the fox. "You can count on it." And that wily fox pulled, and he pulled as hard as he could, and he pulled and pulled until he pulled so hard that his tail broke right off. "Oh!" he screeched. "What happened?" He opened his eyes and began to howl. "Oh dear," said wily Kirsty MacLeod as she ran off home. "I do believe that you have reached the end of your tale."